Hello, welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical. This is the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together every week and we go over the week's events in the world of Scientology as reported on Tony's Substack. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chris. As you can see, I'm not home. I'm overseas on a family vacation, but still keeping an eye on what's going on in Scientology.
Excellent, excellent. As always, you are such a trooper on this thing. And we've got, man, what a week. May you live in interesting times, huh? Okay, Scientology-wise, though, there was some interesting stuff this week and stuff worth commenting on. First off, and something unique to Scientology, which is why I wanted to highlight it in our episode this week, is the Ron Hubbard Offices, and you did an article about that this week. What can you tell us about that and this subject?
Yeah, well, every standard org is required to have an office for L. Ron Hubbard, and we did get to see some new ones in Austin and Mexico City and Chicago, and they look very nice. Each one tries to localize it, and they try to create a place where L. Ron Hubbard can walk right in and take over again. Yep. But what I found interesting in the most recent Advance magazine was the way they're kind of selling the idea of a pilgrimage to the office that he actually used, not one of these, canned sort of generic offices they create for him, but the one he actually used at St. Hill Manor that they claim is exactly the way he left it. Now, this was part of the fun of publishing, these photos that Scientology had put out of the office and the organ he's got there for playing some music and the holy telex machine that he manned day and night. Yes. But also, I thought very interesting was a picture, pretty detailed. It could have been a little higher resolution by my taste, but pretty detailed of his desktop. And it said it had a Navajo blanket with everything else on top of it. Yep. Various pens, something handwritten by Hubbard, some ashtrays, and various things. And you can see that it's the point I made. One of the points I made in the when I was writing about it was, Scientology will assure you we don't worship L. Ron Hubbard. He's just a man. He's the greatest man who ever lived, but he's just a man, and we don't worship him like a god. But here is an example of where they've created basically a shrine to him, and they're actually inviting you to come on over and take a look at this stuff. What I also found interesting was Pete Griffiths said that he was there in the 80s, and it didn't look like that. So the idea that they're preserving exactly what L. Ron Hubbard had is a little questionable. And they might be, gilding the lily a little bit and making things look a little better than they actually were. Right. But Pete doesn't remember a Navajo blanket, and we wondered what that's supposed to be all about. I guess what's Hubbard's connection to? I guess look, this is a guy who was known for writing pulp fiction, all kinds of adventure fiction, and so I guess it wouldn't be too much of a stretch that he'd have a Navajo blanket on his desk. But I just thought it was interesting, and it got a big reaction. People thought that was really, really fun, and that with the musical instruments, they make a big deal about that in Scientology. If you remember, Chris, just a few months ago, we got to see that sort of day in the life of L. Ron Hubbard at St. Hill film. Yep. That I don't think any of us had ever seen before. And it ends with Ron and a friend having a rollicking rendition of some music on those instruments. And I came away with it with two things. Yeah, he really enjoyed himself, but it's goofy music.
Exactly. And remember his mistress, Barbara Kay, talking about how in Palm Springs, in his depression, he was sitting at a piano putting together concertos or something. He considered himself something of a music guy. Don't know that was true. I'm just saying he kind of thought of himself that way,
Yeah.
And the Navajo blanket as well.
What was your? I mean, as somebody that was so wrapped up in it at one time, what were your thoughts about that little shrine to Ron?
Oh, totally. I get the perspective on it. As a former member, of course, I'm not in the frame of mind that we worship the guy, but you're not off at all. We absolutely thought he was the most brilliant philosopher, genius, human being who ever lived, and the respect was out the roof, right? And it absolutely borders right there on worship. It's a gray zone. I'm more than happy to acknowledge. The offices were sacrosanct. That is the word to use. You could not walk into those offices. They were cordoned off. There is a checklist. There's a staff member in each church who has the duty of dusting that space every day. It's a very, it's a codified thing. This isn't a loosey-goosey thing in Scientology. That's what I wanted to highlight with that. And the reverence is real. And so the idea of them saying, come to the original, because everybody gets familiar with the LRH office right away. You walk in, what's this? Oh, it's the office of L. Ron Hubbard, but he's dead. Yes, but it's respect, and everybody buys it. Oh, okay, that makes sense. But the detail is culty. When it's the pack of cool cigarettes that has to be right there on the desk, and the pins and the e-meter and all that crap. It's a very, very exact thing. And that is where it does become shrine-like. I have to give you that for sure. It's probably, here's an observation for you. Actually, it's probably the most religious experience that Scientologists have are those offices, now that I think about it, I mean, in terms of the atmosphere of a religious place, Okay, interesting stuff. Always interesting stuff. Alex Barnes-Ross, updates on progress over in the UK. What's happening over there?
Yeah, so there was an election in England, and it was a really historic shift. The Conservative Party, which had been in power for 14 years, was swept out in kind of a landslide for the Labour Party. And I think that was predicted.
Yeah.
And what Alex did leading up to the election is he reached out to various people who were standing for a member of parliament and asked them, if you're elected, will you pledge to raise Scientology as a subject of debate? And he got 8 or 9 of them to say yes, which was really exciting.
Yep.
2 of them got elected. One is his own MP, Diane Abbott, who is a Black woman that's taken a lot of abuse over the years and has now been there for so long. She's known as the mother of the house because she's the longest serving woman in the house. So it's kind of exciting that she is in a position to maybe help out Alex on that. And then another member of parliament also was elected who had told Alex that he was going to do that. 2 is not a lot. Obviously, they need more people to make it happen. But I think the fact that he has, when was the last time you heard somebody in this country say, yeah, we talked to the congressman and he says he's going to bring up Scientology?
Right.
It doesn't happen. So I really give him a lot of credit that he even thought of doing that. And then I took advantage of this new election, and he's got a couple people on board. So, look, it's a long road ahead, but I just think he's got so much energy, and he's thinking of ways of leveraging his skills. Alex has a lot of skills as a marketer, and I just really admire the work that he's done. So very, very happy to hear that he got at least a little progress going on that.
Yeah, big time. I've been encouraging people for years here to contact your representatives. Make noise about this, and very, very few people really go forward and do that. It's an important call to action. Petitions are important, but direct contact with our elected representatives is priceless. There's no substitute for that. So I heavily encourage anybody out there who's really serious about changing the landscape when it comes to Scientology in our government to reach out and do that work. Alex is doing exactly the work that a lot of us should be doing, frankly, and I validate him and his work for that. I want to be clear about that. I see very few people as effective as he is right now at what he's doing. And it's a slow process. You got to know that. There's no instant,
He's got a number of schemes going. This is just one of them.
That's right.
He's really thinking things through as an activist in ways he can make change.
That's right.
And I hand it to him. I think he's got some great ideas.
I have to agree. Absolutely. Now, this surprised me. I did not see this one coming. Now, we've had a couple losses this week, celebrity deaths, Shannon Doherty, Richard Simmons, yes, that's right. And then Shelley Duval. I mean, all in a couple days. It was really quite something.
And don't forget Dr. Ruth.
Oh my God! And Dr. Ruth, Jesus, that's right. Yeah. Talk about an icon of growing up. I mean, Dr. Ruth was everywhere. Yeah. But Shelley has some Scientology kind of adjacent connection, and there's and herself. What's the story here?
Yeah, so I just admire her as a wonderful actress, and I was glad to see how many wonderful tributes there were to her. She did incredible work in the 70s and the 80s in particular, and I had a Shelley Duval story, and so I thought, this is the time to talk about it. When I was the editor-in-chief of the Village Voice, I was writing about Scientology for the Voice website, and in 2011, I got a phone call from Shelley Duval. Wow. And she wanted me to know. She was living in Texas. She had kind of a real secluded little compound there, is the way she described it, but that she was constantly under attack by Scientologists. And they were trying to get into her place. They were trying to kill her. And I was like, wait a minute. What's your connection? Were you ever a Scientologist? No. Unfortunately, when you're a reporter and you cover this kind of stuff, you get this call or email, very frequently. It's somebody that's convinced that Scientology is breaking into their house or into their online stuff, and then you find out they're also sure they're being watched by the CIA, and the FBI is beaming things into their head, and you get calls like this, and rarely I've interacted with folks and just tried to ask them about getting medical help, but generally, there's just nothing you can do for folks like that. But to get a call like that from Shelley Duval, I was just stunned. I thought for a minute about how this would make kind of an interesting story, but I thought, I don't want to do that to this woman. I told her I just hope she could get some help, and there was nothing I could do, because all I do is write stories, and I'm not going to write a story about Shelley Duval. At that point in 2011, the National Enquirer had done a story about how she was living in a remote part of Texas and had lost her mind. So the word was already out there that she was troubled.
Right.
But I just kept my mouth shut about that. And then 5 years later, she shows up on Dr. Phil. And Dr. Phil's crew had flown out to her place and just put her on the air, just babbling nonsense, just really awful. It was so frightening to see somebody so disconnected from reality. And there was a huge backlash against Dr. Phil. Like, what are you doing? This woman needs help, not publicity.
Yeah.
And there was a huge backlash against Dr. Phil over that. And then it got even stranger, because one of the people who decided to stick up for her against Dr. Phil was Vivian Kubrick.
That's right.
Whose father, of course, was director Stanley Kubrick, who had directed The Shining and had put Shelley Duval through so much hell filming that movie. And so I think for a lot of people, it made sense. Okay, Vivian's trying to make good on what her dad had put Shelley through. She started a GoFundMe, so she started raising tens of thousands of dollars. And I was like, wait a minute. And I wrote about how I finally revealed that I had gotten this call from Shelley Duval 5 years earlier. And then I wrote about how I've been keeping an eye on Vivian Kubrick for a couple of years, because she had suddenly showed up on a video of an Alex Jones rally. And she was, what they say in that field, she was seriously pilled, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
She was a big conspiracy person,
Yes.
and she was a dedicated Scientologist. And her family had not heard from her in years until I posted that story about Vivian. And of course, Alex Jones was fascinated by the fact that Stanley Kubrick's daughter is a fan of mine, and he like featured her and all this. And it was almost as sad as what Dr. Phil was doing
Right.
because she, again, there's another person that needed help. And so I had been following her for a couple of years, and she'd posted some pretty nutty stuff. She was a very conspiracy minded person.
Yeah.
She was a Scientologist that bought into all the crazy conspiracies.
Yeah.
And so now suddenly she's raising all this money. And the family reached out to me. The Kubrick family reached out to me and said that, they were stunned. They hadn't heard from her in years. And she broke her dad's heart when she got into Scientology because she had been a very talented filmmaker too. So anyway, I decided to write something. And I said, look, the last person who should be raising money to get Shelley Duval proper mental health care is a Scientologist.
Right.
And a couple of days later, she took down the GoFundMe and said that she had talked to Shelley's mother, and her mother she said something about how, well, she can't take donations because it would mess up her SAG-AFTRA union health care. And I've talked to some other people that said that's not true, but whatever, she canceled it.
Right.
So, that was my little story, was that, I had known that Shelley Duval was having these delusions. She was sure Scientology was trying to harm her. And then a Scientologist comes along to try to help her in a way that was not going to help. So just a very strange set of circumstances. So, what I perceived was that after that time, after the Dr. Phil thing, I think Shelley Duval did get surrounded by people that really did care about her. Seth Abramovich of the Hollywood Reporter went out there in 2021, met up with her, and he made that observation that there were people that really cared about her, and she still went through some some mood swings, but that she talked about her Hollywood years in really interesting ways. So it sounded like she was in a better situation.
Good.
She had people who cared for her.
Good.
And now sadly she's passed away at only 75.
Mm.
Vivian, I'm not sure what's going on with Vivian Kubrick. She blocked me years ago. I noticed that she went silent on Twitter in 2021, saying she was taking a break from social media. But then she just moved over to Gab, which is the conservative alternative to Twitter. But then she, in February of this year, stopped posting there and said she was taking a break. So I don't know what's going on with her. I know her family is very concerned about her and they worry about her involvement in Scientology and everything and these conspiracies she ascribes to. But that was all. I was just reminded of all that when I heard the sad news about Shelley Duval. But I've really been heartened to see the wonderful assessments being made of her work and the fact that she bravely talked about some of these problems she was having later in life.
Big time. Yeah, big loss on that one. I have a question. Just occurred to me in terms of the connection with Kubrick's and Scientology. The only thing I can connect is Tom Cruise and Eyes Wide Shut. Was Vivian? Is that how she got in? Did Tom Cruise disseminate to her, or do we know?
No, she. Oh gosh, I'd have to look it up. I had to look up my story, Chris. I'm not. I think my memory is she got in 95.
Okay.
So she got in before they were starting to film that.
Yep.
And I can't remember why she got in, but yeah, he wanted her to help out on Eyes Wide Shut, and she was just getting too involved in Scientology. Now, the other interesting thing is, remember, Tom and Nicole were married in 1990. Okay. 1990. And through 92, Nicole did her best to be a Scientologist with Tom. We know, just the other day, the Daily Mail said that Nicole Kidman never got into it. Not true. Nicole Kidman very much was into it. Bruce Hines was her auditor, and he's told me she got all the way to OT2.
Yep.
So if she started in 1990 and by 1992 she was OT2, what does that tell you? Nicole Kidman was probably doing services virtually every day when she was married to Tom Cruise. But then something happened. I think she soured on Miscavige, just like Katie Holmes did. And by 92, she was pulling away. She didn't want to have anything to do with Scientology. And the big secret that we didn't learn for years later was that she pulled Tom out with her.
Right.
And so from 92 to when they broke up in 2000, Tom Cruise really kept an arm's length away from Scientology, not completely cut off, but arm's length. So Mike Rinder has talked about the fact that when they went to go film Eyes Wide Shut in like 90s, and the whole year of 1996 or something, and they were sequestered with Kubrick, Dave was going crazy because he couldn't get intel on what was going on. Well, we also found out that Dave Miscavige was using Tom's personal assistant to spy on him. That's a story I wrote for the Village Voice 12 years ago.
Yep.
And got that confirmed from Mike, from Claire, that they would see this guy come back and report to Dave like daily about what was going on in Tom's household. In 98, Tom did come to the Celebrity Center in Hollywood and did some stuff with Tommy Davis that Lawrence Wright wrote about. But other than that, he really kept an arm's length from Scientology because of Nicole. Nicole had turned on it, you know.
Right.
And then when they broke up in 2000, that's Marty and Mike say that's when Dave said, job one, get that guy back in.
Yep.
And so from 2001, 2, 3, they were working on Tom Cruise to get him not only back in Scientology, but really spun up. And Marty Rathbun was personally auditing Tom Cruise in that time. Yep. Jason Begay told me about that. He said he saw it.
Yep.
And by 2003, they had created the most gung-ho Scientologists on the planet. And that summer is when Tom agreed to open the new Applied Scholastics facility in Missouri with Alfredi Johnson. You can still see that picture of Tom Cruise doing that. And then 2004 is when he went to the only Ideal Org opening he's ever gone to, which was in Madrid, Spain.
That's right.
Anyway, we get to the whole Tom Cruise progression, but that's an important part of that is that when he was filming Eyes Wide Shut with Stanley Kubrick, he was out of Scientology.
Got it.
But Stanley was very frustrated that Vivian didn't want to work with him anymore because she was so wrapped up in it, and she didn't come. He died just a few months before the film actually opened in 1999.
Right.
And when she showed up at the funeral with a Scientology handler. And the family was still upset about that when I talked to them about it years later.
Absolutely. And rightfully so. Scientology gets its hooks on you. And man, it is hard to get away. It is hard. Also, of course, also worth noting at that time is, and 2000 is when Marty also worked on those kids, the adopted Connor and Isabella, and turned them against Nicole as well because they went with Sean or with Tom. Yeah.
Just a small detail on that. Tom and Nicole split custody of Isabella and Connor, but Nicole went home to Australia. And Tom had the kids. At that time, he was living in LA. They were around him all the time. Yep. So even though they technically, legally shared custody, they were with Tom all the time. And, you know, that they've grown up to be Scientologists today.
Yep. Exactly. They're very sad. Okay. Well, that's the update there. Now, this human rights trafficking lawsuit got some new legs because of a possible reinterpretation or rechange in the Supreme Court, how they deal with contract law. This was put back into the court system. Now Scientology responded. What do we got?
Well, it's always interesting when Scientology responds.
Yeah.
Because the language is always so angry.
Yes.
Because these attorneys are not just writing for the court. Of course, they're writing for David Miscavige. So they have to act offended. And it's so tiresome. It's so unnecessary. Just make your argument.
That's right.
And they actually have a pretty good argument here. You know, this is the lawsuit from Valeska Paris and the Baxters, Gawain and Laura Baxter, who are Australian residents. And they were Sea Org workers, and they're suing over the way they were treated as children and adults in the Sea Org, working on the free winds in the Caribbean. They sued in Tampa federal court. Scientology then, of course, right away said, "No, you signed contracts. You promised in these contracts never to sue us. You have to go to arbitration instead." The Tampa federal judge there, Judge Thomas Barber, was very frustrated because you could tell he thought they had a good argument about duress.
Yep.
That these young people at that time were just a piece of paper was put in front of them and they were told to sign it. They didn't have time to read it. They had no chance to understand what was in it. And you could tell the judge thought that was something that he should be able to take into consideration. But he was frustrated because the Supreme Court had this 1967 decision called Prima Paint that says, no, the judge doesn't get to decide that. That goes to the arbitrator. The arbitrator decides whether the contracts are fraudulent or signed under duress, which seems backwards and weird. But the judge said, look, there's nothing I can do. And so he forced the case into arbitration. They asked him to petition the appeals court to do an early appeal. He granted them that. They filed their petition with the appeals court, but that was denied. So now they've come back to court and said, look, Judge, on May 23rd, the U.S. Supreme Court had a new opinion in a case called Susky. And in Susky, they found that the judge can consider things like duress and fraud before the arbitrator gets it. So since the law has changed, we think you should go back to the beginning, take back the ruling, and they know that he was frustrated and that he might be interested in doing this. This week, Scientology answered and said, no, you're misrepresenting that May 23rd ruling. The May 23rd ruling was about when there are conflicting contracts, multiple contracts, then the judge needs to make some decisions. That's not the situation here. So, that's, and who knows? I don't know. I don't know how the judge is going to interpret that, but that's a very simple argument to make. It doesn't need to be wrapped up in all this angry language. But that's, they write it for Dave. It's got to come off sneering and offended and, smelling salts, that kind of thing.
That's right.
So it's always entertaining, but I think, they do have a point. And so it's really up to Judge Barber to decide, does this Supreme Court ruling, the new one, apply in this case or not? And we just have to wait to see what he says. The other thing that Valeska's team had argued was that the arbitration ruling, while it applies to the defendants like the Church of Scientology and the flag land base, whatever, it shouldn't apply to Dave. That Dave's an individual and he never filed a motion for arbitration. So the lawsuit should just be going against him anyway. Dave filed separately under his attorney a document saying that's not true, that clearly the judge's ruling did apply to him, and also some more sneering and, angry language. But so this is what we need to wait. I don't know what kind of schedule Judge Barber's on, but I really, I hand it to Valeska and the Baxters and their attorneys that they've found something that might work and they're trying. And so now we just wait to see what the judge says. And like I said, this judge was so frustrated that he was unable to look into these subjects. He might think that this gives him the opportunity. So we'll see.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. We need, as I've mentioned many times, we need that legal eagle action here of somebody who really understands their way through this stuff, because we need better arguments being made that judges can agree with, because this Supreme Court nonsense is... It is frustrating. It doesn't even begin to describe what SX members feel like when we have to watch this crap, because we're watching people who have are supposed to be having our backs. These are people who are supposed to be watching and ensuring we have a fair and legal justice system, not a system that enables predatory behavior and then gives them a pat on the back when they're the ones who get to decide whether they were predators or not. I mean, this is so off the rails of our Supreme Court. And, I've got other things to say about our Supreme Court these days. So I'm very, very unhappy with that body as a whole. And this is just one of the many reasons why. So, okay. And Scientology legal battles. I got some sharp and pointed language for Scientology too. And finally, religious worker visas. Now, this is a big deal. This has been a big topic in Scientology, in the land of Scientology. I know personally, going all the way back to the 90s when the Sea Org implemented a whole new recruitment line, as they called it, quote unquote, with getting people in from Mexico, getting people in from other countries on these religious worker visas where they could come over as volunteers, work for the Sea Org, and everything was green light. And look at all these new people we're getting. Of course, they can't speak English, but hey, look at all these statistics we're getting. So that was kind of how it was in the 90s. This has continued to be an operation for Scientology. And now what happened this last week on this?
Well, the whole thing is just so questionable because why do religions in this country need religious workers from overseas to begin with? Right?
Good point.
I mean, don't you have enough people here to do the quote religious work? We're not talking about physical labor. We're talking about the religious work. Okay, whatever. So it exists. All right. Jeff Jacobson has written about this. R.M. Siebert did some great research for us several years ago where she put some numbers on it and showed just how much, Scientology alone takes in more of these R1 religious visas than any other religion in this country. And it's one of the smallest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, the scandal is you're telling the government we can't, we need this Hungarian or Czech or Russian person to come over here and do religious work because our people here can't do it, which is suspect to begin with. And then they come over, and if you go back 6 months and see what they're actually doing, they're cleaning bathrooms.
Yep.
They're working in the galley. I mean, that's the scandal, is they're just using these visas because they have a manpower problem at places like the Flag Land Base.
Yep.
So R.M. Siebert, like I said, did some amazing research for us 8 or 9 years ago, putting some real numbers on this. And then New York Magazine last year took some of her work and then talked to some individuals that had been through this, put together a good piece. And now the government, it's an interesting situation because, again, Scientology is not the only religious organization in this country that uses these visas. And normally, okay, for some whatever reason, you need somebody from Ireland to come over for your church and they get on a religious visa. Well, after some time, I'm not exactly sure how long it is, that visa runs out. They have to go back home for like a year before they qualify to come over again. That's been the rule for a long time. That didn't happen all that much because a lot of these people would come over and then apply for a green card.
Right.
And that was kind of like the pipeline that was going on here. Well, not too long ago, the government decided to make it much harder for a religious worker to get a green card, like a 10-year wait or something crazy.
Wow.
So to compensate for that, they're now getting the approval process on a new rule that would allow you to only go home for a month instead of a year to kind of balance out. Okay, we're going to make it harder for these churches to get green cards for these people, but we'll make it easier for them to renew them. So that could benefit Scientology, actually.
Yeah.
But what my reader that put this together, he's also the same reader that researched the CST stuff a while back. He does good research. He looked. There's this lobbying effort from some pretty big religious organizations in this country that want this rule change because they're like, look, if you're going to make us wait 10 years to get a green card, at least make it easier for our people to renew their visas. Okay, so there's a heavy hitter list of religious organizations that are lobbying the government to make this happen. And very distinctly not on that list is the Church of Scientology. And that's got to be bugging Dave because they love to be part of these interfaith things. They're so big on interfaith. And, we're reading between the lines and saying, yeah, these other organizations know that Scientology is totally abusing this process. And so they don't want them helping to get this positive rule change, positive from their point of view. On the flip side, the government has been cracking down with more oversight. And they've, literally been raiding some places and checking in, and they're doing more on-site inspections to make sure that these people with R1 religious visas aren't just cleaning toilets, right?
Right.
Now when that is going to translate to government agents descending on the flag land base,
right,
to check things out, I don't know. I don't know. But so it's kind of a mixed bag, Chris. It's like, we know that Scientology is abusing this whole process, and it looks like these other religious organizations are trying to get a little give and take out of the government over it. But when is the government going to pay attention to the fact that nobody applies for more of these visas than the Church of Scientology? And they're all just coming over for menial labor. None of them are doing religious work. So
no, it's security guard work, it's hotel cleaning, it's galley work. That's what they're doing. The highest level stuff they're doing is the security jobs. Right? We know the Hungarian security force at flag, right? This kind of thing. It is what it is. And I will also say that I literally witnessed in front of my very eyes fraud on this point while I was in. I was on the RPF with a guy who was from Hungary. And he was married to a Sea Org American, and they were divorced, or they were Splitsville completely. But when it came time for the renewal, here's the pictures of them lovey-dovey sitting on the grass out at a picnic, having a good time. And I watched that, and I was like, what the fuck is going on here? Because I didn't understand religious visas and how all that stuff worked. I was just an RPFer. But it seemed so weird to me that this guy who was no longer with his wife was taking pictures with his wife as though, for the government. And I just thought, this is the weirdest thing I think I've ever seen. And it just kind of went in and out of my life. But now it has all this context of fraud. And it was just blatant, Yeah. And very justified. Nobody had any problem with it at all. It was just for the government, just those government guys. Anyway, Scientology, what are you going to do? On that note, what are we looking at this next week? Any preview of anything?
I'm on vacation, but I got some really nice submissions from some readers that I'm looking forward to people getting a look at. So those are coming out pretty soon. And I'm waiting for some court stuff to come in. Long-term project is getting near.
Cool.
Location. Lots of stuff going on.
Excellent. Well, we're definitely. I've been being asked also about updates on Leah's lawsuit. I guess we're just waiting for the next filings. Yeah.
Well, keep in mind it's on appeal, and so we're probably not going to hear a lot about that. There are some updates to it coming pretty soon. I think I'm just waiting for some documentation, but once this stuff gets sent up to appeals court, it just slows down.
Right.
Just remember what happened there was that Judge Randolph Hammock, removed some of her defamation claims, but kept 8 of her 9 causes of action. Neither side was happy with his ruling. Leah didn't like the fact that some of her defamation claims were removed. Scientology didn't like that all the rest of it stood, and both sides are appealing. And then Dave found a way to remove him. So the judge is gone, and both sides are appealing the ruling. So, that's going to take a year and a half, something like that.
Jesus.
So, we're not going to hear a whole lot about that. But I think I will have some updates about that case pretty soon.
Okay. All right. Well, settle in, folks. That is the game with the legal battles. It is a slow process. All right. And, thanks for coming around, everybody. This has been the update for this week. Hope it was interesting for you. We will keep you informed as things move on. Tony, thank you very much. Of course, subscribe to Tony's Substack. The address is right there on the screen, as I say every week. And get your daily notifications and catch up with us for the weekly summary. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.